Right, okay, so we've got this thing, there's a technician, they're setting up user accounts. Not seeing that.
No.
What, that big tank?
Yeah.
How have you lost that?
Gasping. Shoot my own saliva first.
Right, okay, so it's a classic user account question which is always going to be about concatenation, joining text together, manipulating strings. It's really a GCSE question. So let's just look at it. They want to see that we can follow rules. Alright? So we need a first name. We need a surname. We then have to make this username up. And there's a rule set for this. So we use the entire surname first. Then we just take the first letter from the surname. And then we add a number. Okay? Pretty standard way of auto-generating usernames, to be honest. Right. Then, and the key bit, so there's a couple of different phases to this. The key bit is, if the username already exists, then we have to generate another name by incrementing the number. Okay, until it is unique. Now, a couple of different things here. This is a classic question where they're asking you to use a function that they've defined. We haven't seen the code for it. We don't need to see the code for it. But they have given us this thing that we can check called existing users. And all we've got to do is we get a true or false value to say whether it's unique. Alright, and we've got to use that. They're just asking us to keep doing this until we get to a unique one. So there's a few elements you should be thinking about before you even start. There's going to be some marks for input. So let's do that bit. There's going to be marks for building this name. So grabbing the surname, grabbing the first character of the first name, and this number bit, and just concatenate it all together. There's going to be marks, even if I can't do the rest of it. But then there's this bit. Doing a loop. And keep generating a new name with a different number. So this bit up here in step 3 really is the core part of a loop. Depends what type of loop we want to do. Alright, we might find that we duplicate ourselves. What you mustn't do in these cases, if I was building this for real, I would create a function that generated a username for me. So I didn't have to duplicate that bit of code. So did step 3. So I gave it a surname and a first name and a number, and it did that for me and just gave me a string back. Okay? But we haven't got time to start messing about with that, and you're overcomplicating things. So we've got to take it simple. So let's just do the first bit first. Okay? Now most people did, when they did this, tackle it in the right way, but a few people just made it, just overcomplicated this question. Right, so I'm not going to go mad and give myself massive long usernames for variables. So first name is going to be input first name. It said it had to be pseudocode or program code. So it cannot be structured English. It has to be code orientated. So S name I'm going to use as my surname. So I'm going to get some sort of marks for that. Chances are it'll be 1 mark. Right, okay, so we then need to have this number generated. So let's create a number. I'm not going to call it number because I don't want to have to write too much. And they said start with 1. So let's start that to 1. We then need to create this username. So let's just create a variable called user. And we've got to do that little bit of concatenation. Now, if we scroll back and have a look what it said, and double check, I've gone too far. Why are computers so slow? They're so fast, yet they render so slow now. Right, whole of the surname first, followed by the first letter of their name, their first name, followed by that number. So, that the first bit of that's easy. So I'm going to say that is S name plus, right, first letter. Couple of different ways of getting the first letter. You could do this. Use array indexing, because you can with strings in most languages, and say, give me the first character. That's the easy way of doing it. I'll write you an alternative one in a sec. Plus the num. So I could have written that. Or, and I'll just do this in an alternative colour, I could have done user equals sname plus fname and then use the substring function. So substring and just said from character 0 give me one character. So I could have written it like that. Okay? Anything within reason when it says the pseudocode. If they ask us for program code, we've got to do it in either Python, if you're happy with that, or JavaScript. But that's up to you. Right, so we've generated that username. We've now got to do this loop. So while we haven't got a unique one, so let me go back to Mimbaloo. So I'm going to do a while loop, because I don't know how long this is going to take. And their function was called existing users. So I've got to call their function. I'm going to use their name in there, a capital U. Right, I'm going to give it what I've made up as username. So I've called it user, so I'm going to pass it as a parameter. That's what they're testing when they ask you to use a function. Do you know how to use a function? Okay, so that returns true if it exists, that name. So while that is true, I want to do this loop and I want to generate the next username. I do see you lot doing this, and I've seen it way too much. You do not need to write that. It's still correct, it still works. Why don't you need to say, is that result equal to true? What controls a while loop? It's a condition, isn't it? What's the outcome of any condition, no matter how complicated it is? Yeah, true or false? A boolean. But that function already gave us a boolean. True or false? So I don't actually need to say, is it equal to true? Because if it's equal to true, that's true. It was already true. Yeah. So what I'm doing is, it's like, I'm not saying don't do that. Sometimes you might do that because it makes it more logical to read. But we don't need to do that, is what I'm saying. I'm saying you're making the code more complicated than it needs to be. We can actually just write that. Right, so if that is true, what we need to do is increment that number. So I'm going to say num plus plus, because that's nice and simple. I can say num equals num plus 1 if I want, but I don't have to. I then need to build the username again. So I'm just going to say user equals, and I'm using the same name, because then that makes the loop work. So I'm just going to say fname, and there are loads of different ways you could have done this. You could have actually built the name part and then just keep changing the number, so you didn't have to do it. But they didn't ask us for the most efficient bit of code ever. And I'm going to just put loop or something just to indicate that's the end of the loop. I think that was it. I think. Right, it said write a procedure, so what have I missed? What have I lost a mark for? Yeah, not putting procedure or proc or something at the top. So up here, I really should have gone proc, what do they call it? Create username. Now this is one of those cases where when I was marking this, some of you put parameters. You put first name and second name. But they specifically asked you to input them. If they specifically ask you to input them, then you don't need these parameters. If they said, create username accepts a first name and a surname, then yeah, put them as parameters. But you'd lose 1 mark for that, because you've not done the input. But you've still got all the data you need to do the thing. That's it. Okay? They're never going to be that much more complicated than 6 or 7 lines of code. Yeah, maybe I'm lying there. Maybe 9 lines maximum. But you've got to just tackle them logically. That generally, the questions will be bullet points. The process. God, so slow. The process will be rendered as steps or bullet points. Okay? So, you need to scan it so that you get your head straight about what you're tackling. But after that, it's just a matter of putting the elements down. They positively mark so that if you don't do something right, they're not going to say, oh, you can't have any more marks. Okay? They actually gave you on the mark scheme, when you look at it, a mark for calling the function properly. A mark for using it to control the loop. So, they are being quite fair with that.